Hello, fellow Planeswalkers, it's Scott, and we're coming to you on the official Caffeinated Gamers YouTube channel. And today we're getting our first look at the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. So at World Championship number 29, there was a panel that looked at the Lost Caverns of Ixalan and gave us our first preview cards from the set, which we're going to look at today, and then also what else is included as part of the set. So let's dive in to the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. So first we've got Breach's Eager Pillager. For 2 and a red mana, you get a legendary creature that's a goblin pirate. It's got first strike and it's a 3/3 and a very important ability. Whenever a pirate you control attacks, choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn. Create a treasure token. Target creature can't block this turn. Exile the top card of your library. You may play it this turn. So very powerful card that I think fits in not only into a mono red build, but also some other builds that we're going to see that may want to include pirates from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. So I think this is a card to keep an eye out for, because I think it's going to see a decent amount of play in Standard. Next, we've got Ghalta Stampede Tyrant. For 5 and 3 green mana, you get a legendary creature that's an Elder Dinosaur that's a 12/12 with Trample. And when Ghalta Stampeding Tyrant enters the battlefield, put any number of creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield. So 8 mana is an incredibly large sum of mana for a particular card. But the way green ramps right now, getting to Ghalta at turn 5 or 6 isn't foreseeable at this point, because of all of the ways that green gets to ramp into spells, and we're going to see some more with what we're going to look at today. So I think Ghalta is definitely playable in Standard. Now, is it going to be a 4-of index? No, it'd probably be like a couple copies in a mono green deck, or a deck that's going to ramp itself to a point where you can get the 3 green mana and have 5 additional mana to go ahead and play Ghalta. So good card. We'll see how it works out in Standard. Next, we've got the Skullspore Nexus. For 6 and 2 green mana, we have legendary artifact. And also, this spell costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So in some instances, you could literally cast the Skullspore Nexus for only 2 green mana, because we do have enough cards in Standard that you could get to that place by the mid-game and be able to cast this for only 2 mana, and then you get the benefits that go along with this particular card. And whenever 1 or more non-token creatures you control die, create a green fungus dinosaur creature token with base power and toughness, each equal to the total power of those creatures. So this has a very nice death trigger, which I think green decks will appreciate, because one of the reasons that green isn't doing well right now in Standard as a solo color is because there's just so much removal across Standard that even when there are really good creatures that green would like to play, playing them becomes very difficult. But with Skullspore Nexus, when those creatures die, you're going to get a token that is the equivalent of them. And I think that is going to be a very powerful ability, not only in Standard, but in Commander and other areas. And also you can tap and pay 2 mana, the Skullspore Nexus, and you get to double target creature's power until the end of turn. So if you can put that on a body that's a trampler and trample through, and maybe you can just end the game there on that particular turn. So I'm very excited about Skullspore Nexus. I think it's going to be an interesting card that may help green be a standalone deck again in Standard for the first time in quite a while. Next, we have Kalin Daring Traveler. For 1 and a white mana. You get a legendary creature that's a human fairy scout and is a 2/3. Whenever Kalin Daring Traveler attacks, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card with mana value 3 or less, put it into your hand. Otherwise, you may put it into your graveyard. So Kalin right there, we've got some very nice card draw ability. So, you cast this on turn 2, on turn 3, you're attacking, you look at the top card of your library. And I would assume that in a deck that Kalin would be played in, you're going to have a lot of 3 mana or less creatures so that you can get the benefit of this particular ability. Now, interestingly enough, this is also a adventure card, and you get Journey On for 1 green mana. It's a sorcery, and you get to create X map tokens, where X is 1 plus the number of opponents who control an artifact. So basically what it's saying is you're always going to get to create 1 map token. If your opponent has an artifact in play, then you get to have 2. So that is a nice little ability. We're not sure what map tokens are at this moment, but it could be mana, it could be getting to get an extra land, any number of things that would make that a nice advantage spell in the middle of the game or early in the game to help you ramp hopefully into the bigger things you want to play in your deck. So again, another 2 good cards for standard. Next we've got Huatli, Poet of Unity. For 2 and a green mana, you legendary creature. It's this human warrior bard and is a 2/3, and when Huatli, Poet of Unity, enters the battlefield, search your library for a basic land, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. So that's a really nice ability. 3 mana, go get a land and get a 2/3 body. I mean, it's not Toperi Stomper, which is 4/4 and draw a land and has vigilance, but you have to have 7 lands on the battlefield before it can actually attack or block. So I think Huatli is a nice compromise position from that. Now, in addition to that, Huatli is going to be one of the flip cards from the set. So for 3, a red or a white mana, and a red or a white mana, so for 5 total mana, you can exile Huatli, then return her to the battlefield, transform under her owner's control. But you get to activate this only as a sorcery, so it's not something you can activate to save Huatli in the game. So if you do transform Huatli, then you get Roar of the Fifth People. So on chapter 1, you get to create 2 3/3 green dinosaur creature tokens. It really helps to account for the 5 mana you're investing to flip Huatli. So you get 6 power on the board. So not a bad payoff immediately for that. On chapter 2, Roar of the Fifth People gains creatures you control at red, green, or white mana. On chapter 3, you get to search your library for a dinosaur card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. And then on chapter 4, dinosaurs you control gain double strike and trample until the end of turn. So I think Huatli is probably going to go in a dinosaur deck. Now we've got a few dinosaurs currently in standard, but it'll be interesting to see what we get from Ixalan, because this is where we got a lot of really good dinosaurs the last time we visited. So I think Huatli is going to fit into that deck as at least a couple of copies in a dinosaur build from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. Next, we've got Ogier Axanil, Deepest Might. For 2 and 2 red mana, you get a legendary creature. That's a god. It's a 4/4 with trample. And if a red source you control would deal an amount of non-combat damage less than Ogier Axanil's power to an opponent, that source deals damage equal to Ogier Axanil's power instead. Whenever Ogier Axanil dies, return it to the battlefield tapped and transform under its owner's control. So when it dies, you get to flip it, and then you get Temple of Power, which is a land, and it allows you to tap it for red mana. So if Ogier dies, then you get the benefit of added mana to your mana base as a result of that. Now, you can also transform the Temple of Power back into Ogier. For 2 and a red mana, you can tap it and transform Temple of Power, but you can only activate if red sources you control dealt 4 or more non-combat damage this turn, and only as a sorcery. So I think there may be times when you're able to do this, but I think the reality is the backside is a bonus. It just becomes a land that is a nice bonus for you. And you're really focusing on the front side of it, where Ogier Axanil really becomes a major source of damage to your opponent. Because anytime you're doing damage, whether it's 1, 2, 3, it becomes 4 every time at a minimum. And then with the rolls we got from Eldraine, you could certainly put one of those on him to make him a 5/5, and then it's 5 damage. So very quickly I can see this really taking over a game. And if you cast this with open mana and the ability to strike your opponent, I see this as something that's going to have a clear advantage to red players in the upcoming standard season and going forward. Next, we have Cavern of Souls, which is a reprint that has seen a tremendous amount of modern play over the years, and now is going to be able to not only be played in Standard, but also in Pioneer. So what does Cavern of Souls do? So as Cavern of Souls enters the battlefield, you get to choose a creature type. Pirates, vampires, merfolk, we know are going to be 3 that are going to be very common in the Ixalan set. Or you can, so when you choose that, then it'll add colorless mana just by tapping it. Or when you cast a creature of the chosen type, you can add 1 mana of any color, spend this mana only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type, and that spell can't be countered. So Cavern of Souls, the big thing that it does is it makes your spells uncounterable, and that's a tremendously powerful ability in Standard, because there are so many counter spells right now that are out there, and Cavern of Souls basically goes around those spells, and I think that's going to make it a inclusion in a wide variety of decks. So those are the cards for Standard that we got so far, but what they also revealed is we're going to get some special sets. So the first one is we're going to get a Jurassic World collection, and here's our first card from that set. It's Welcome To, which is a saga, and on chapter 1 each for each opponent up to 1 target non-creature artifact they control becomes a 0/4 wall artifact creature with defender as long as you control this saga. On chapter 2 you get to create a 3/3 green dinosaur creature token with trample. It gains haste until the end of the turn, so you're getting a couple creatures out of this at early in the game at least. And then on chapter 3, destroy all walls, which means destroy your artifact. Exile the saga and return it to the battlefield transformed under your control. And when you transform it on chapter 3, you get Jurassic Park, which is a legendary land. Each dinosaur card in your graveyard has escape. The escape cost is equal to the card's mana value plus exile 3 other cards from your graveyard. And you can add green for each dinosaur you control. So this is a card that I can see in Dinosaur Commander decks, possibly going even back to Modern, but I don't think we really have a dinosaur deck that's strong there at this point. It's more of a, hey, I like playing dinosaur deck. So I think this has got some playability in different formats, particularly in the EDH format. Next, we've got Ian Malcolm, Chaotician. For 1, a blue and a red mana, you get a legendary creature that's a human scientist. That's a 2/2, and whenever a player draws their second card each turn, that player exiles the top card of their library. During each player's turn, that player may cast a spell from among the cards they don't own exiled with Ian Malcolm, Chaotician, and mana of any type can be spent to cast it. It's an interesting kind of ability. So your opponent is drawing extra cards, and the consequence of that is they have to exile cards from the top of their deck every turn that they do that. And the result of it is now you, if you're playing Ian Malcolm, you get to then have the opportunity to cast those spells that they're exiling rather than your opponent having access to them. So certainly in Commander, this would be a card that I think some decks would be interested in because there's so much card draw in EDH right now. Next, we have Indominus Rex Alpha for 1, 2 green, and a combination of either blue-black or a blue-black, so total for 5 mana. You get a legendary creature that's a dinosaur mutant. It's a 6/6. As Indominus Rex Alpha enters the battlefield, discard any number of creature cards. It enters with a flying counter on it if a card discarded this way has flying. The same is true for First Strike, Double Strike, Death Touch, Hexproof, Haste, Indestructible, Lifelink, Menace, Reach, Trample, and Vigilance. Whenever Indominus Rex enters the battlefield, draw a card for each counter on it. So each card you discard to Indominus Rex's ability, because you have one of those abilities on the card, then you get a card to replace it. So a very powerful card draw engine in and of itself. but also it's going to leave a large creature on the field that potentially can attack the turn it comes into play. So pretty powerful card. Next, we've got our special guest. So also in the Lost Caverns of Ixalan packs, we're going to see a series called the Special Guest cards. So here are 2 examples of that. The first is the Lord of Atlantis for 2 blue mana. It's a merfolk. Other merfolk get +1/+1 and have Island Walk, and it's a 2/2. So this is a card that comes from the early days of Magic. That has been reprinted a lot of times, but this is a nice reprinting to give more people access to it, so it can be played in Modern and some of the other formats. Next, we've got the special guest, Mana Crypt. For 0 mana, you get an artifact, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you flip a coin. If you lose the flip, Mana Crypt deals 3 damage to you, so very negative downside to it if that happens. But you also get to, for 0 mana, you get to add 2 colorless mana. So you can play this on turn 1 and play a land, and then you can play a 3 mana spell on creature on turn 1. You can do on turn 2, you can play a 4 mana spell. On turn 3, you can do a 5 mana spell. So it really ramps you very quickly into the bigger creatures in your deck. So I think this is, a great reprint. We've seen it in other reprints, and this is also going to be a special printing where we're going to see it in multiple colors. So a very interesting card, and it will be interesting to see who these special guests are and what formats they're going to be playable in. All right, so that's it for the Lost Caverns of Ixalan previews. We've got what looks like a very interesting set coming to us that's going to have some interesting mechanics, and hopefully we'll continue to diversify the standard format. So if you haven't done so already, remember to like and subscribe, because that helps us out to get our videos out to more people. And I will see you in the future with more Lost Caverns of Ixalan previews.